People who cater to the super rich. What things have you seen? Before we start, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos. I wish you a pleasant viewing experience. Story 1. I briefly worked with one of the top Saudi Arabian crown princes in the 80s. He would buy out the top 3 floors of the best hotels, Four Seasons, etc. 2 floors were for maid shelf security. Top floor was for the royal family once it was only the prince and his 3 wives. Crazy shoot. Story 2. I used to work for a billionaire Russian family as a tutor for their daughter. One day we're in her room studying, and suddenly she yells, "Daddy's home," and runs to the window. She'd heard a helicopter and knew it was about to land on the lawn. Story 3. My grandfather died with a $20 million portfolio. He lived in a 1-bedroom condo that was built in the 50s, drove a rusted-out Honda, and his entire wardrobe came from Walmart and was 10 years old. At his will reading, a bunch of distant relatives showed up, hoping to get a piece. In his will, he made fun of all of them, then spent 10 pages detailing how and where he wanted all of his money donated to specific charities and foundations. Some of it was even really surprising, as nobody besides him was aware that he casually owned 160 acres of land in Vermont that was just forest. The land was donated to a land trust and turned into hiking trails. Story 4. A friend from high school worked a few years as a deckhand on yachts in the Mediterranean, and he said he once jumped in to get a customer's bag and got tipped $4,000. He also observed actual bricks of coke brought onto P. Diddy's yacht. Story 5. I am an art student working as a gardener. We work in one of the wealthiest areas in my country. Some customers are really eager to show me their collection of artworks that they have hanging on their walls once they find out that I study it. I remember one time standing in a bathroom with my dirty gardening clothes, and there was a Picasso above the toilet. Story 6. I used to do pool and spa maintenance in my 20s. I worked on one property with a mountainside, 10-bedroom, 14-bath mansion with a saltwater pool, tennis courts, guest mansion, and a servant's house that was 4-bedroom, 5-bath. The property had so much more stuff, but that isn't the crazy thing. I worked on this property for 2 years, year-round, 5 days a week, and not a single person was ever there. The middle-aged single woman that owned it lived in a city about 4 hours away and just didn't come to the property because she was so busy with work. A multi-million-dollar compound, just empty, all the time. Finally, after 2 years, I got a call from my boss on my day off. He asked if I could go to the house to put some pool floats away. He apologized because it was my day off, but said the owner would pay me $500 to go put them away. I was confused as to why there were even pool floats out anyway, because nobody was ever there, but I figured fudge it, $500 for 10 minutes. I show up to the house, and the woman's adult children were staying at the house with about 10 kids between them all, and they were having a massive pool party cookout. I awkwardly walked up and said to one of the parents, "Sorry, it must have been a mistake, but I was told to come put pool floats away, but you're obviously here, so I'll leave." Presumably, the woman's adult son said, "Oh no, we're getting ready to leave. You can take them." Then he instructed the kids to push them towards me. I literally grabbed 1 inner tube float and 4 pool noodles, brought them 10 feet into the pool house, and put them away. I confusedly said they were all set and went to leave. The son thanked me and handed me a folded mass of 20 bills. It was $400. I was expecting $500 from my boss for payment, but I figured $400 cash was still overpayment, so I didn't mention it. The next day at work, my boss gave me $1,000. I told him the son had already paid me $400, which was fine. He said the son told the woman how great a job I did, so she wanted to pay me $1,000 instead of $500 return, and the $400 was a tip from her son. For 10 minutes of work, she actually called my boss the next day to ask if she should reimburse me for gas, since it was 15 minutes from my house. I told him that I was all set. Story 7. Worked graveyards as a valet at an ultra-luxury boutique hotel. It's quite shocking how some of these people live, and you'd never have a clue by just looking at them on the street. One weekday night, I was asked at 2 a.m. by a guest to bring around his Bentley. Regular-looking dude came out with a backpack, got in, and left. Not 30 minutes later, the same dude pulls up in a Ferrari and now has a briefcase instead of backpack. Skip ahead an hour, and the same guy orders 5 shot glasses to his room. I go up, and it's 2 guys in robes and 2 naked ladies on the couch. They have lines of Coke and booze on the coffee table. They tip me $50 for the shot glasses, and I leave. 2 hours later, just as the sun was rising, the 2 guys come out together in suits looking like they were heading to the office. The ladies left shortly after. Obviously, substances and escorts were nothing new, but the car swap middle of the night was a bit strange. Story 8. My dad works in shipping, and has a lot of friends who have worked on super yachts. In the 90s, one of his mates got a call up to bring the yacht of a particular Australian media tycoon, billionaire, not that one, from Sydney to New York, with instructions to be anchored in a particular bay at an exact time with a lunch spread for 50 people ready. So they got there and set up the food. The guy never showed up. Turns out he was having a rich dude party in a building overlooking the harbor and wanted to be able to point down and say, "That's my boat." He wanted the lunch just in case he decided to take his rich friends down to his yacht. But he didn't feel like it that day, so all the food got partied too hard and they sailed back to Aus without seeing him. Answer: having been on some rich Australians racing and cruising yacht, it was an experience. He owned 2 of them, massive sailing yachts with multiple bedrooms and each with its own bathroom. I met a woman who was on the crew and she invited me on board. I felt so out of place. Never met the owner. I don't think he attended the race himself. I've heard of crews that just sail around the world to meet owners in places only to not see them. Even saw some guy get delivered to his yacht via waterplane with the crew standing on the deck to meet him at the Whitsunday Islands. Story 9. I had a classmate whose father or mother was filthy rich from family money, can't remember. But they and he were amazing people. In uni, this girl in class who was really nice, but also came from a poor family, dropped her MacBook. She worked 60 hours a week for 3 months in the summer. He just came up, gave her his MacBook, and said he would just get a new one after school and his parents wouldn't care. Pure generosity, there was no TikTok movie or karma whoring going on. He was a stellar dude spending his parents' money, but only on stuff for other people, and in a nice, helpful way. He also gave all the guys in class a suit for graduation. Lots of the people were talking about renting one and stuff, and he told everybody he knew a place to rent real nice suits. We all went there, and we all rented a suit for 100 euros or so, everything included. And when you went to return it, we found out they were all paid for by this dude. He was like, renting a suit is stupid, but buying a suit is expensive. Now you got best of both worlds. Last thing I heard, he bought like 10 PS5 from scalpers and sold them for retail to kids in the neighborhood. Fudge, I should have stayed friends with him. Story 10. Worked at a restaurant where a few of the regulars were the children of billionaires. I told my parents that my tuition cost $500,000, a student from China in America. I overheard after being asked how she has so much money. Another time I was serving a table, I was asked to bring a tray of 60 patron shots, 600 for a 19-year-old student. I must have had an incredulous look on my face because his only response to assuage my concern was, "My father owns diamond mines in Africa." Story 11. My dad used to work for a private airfield. They had a ton of people fly in, but most of the more richer clients always flew in at night. I remember one time in high school, I had to do a job shadow thing and went to work with my dad. They had the owner of a California airport fly in for the weekend. My job was to stand outside with an umbrella, so I stood outside with the umbrella. His wife tipped me $20 and said, "The sandwich trays are real silver. Have at it, kid." After they got in their car, I asked my dad what she meant. Apparently, when some richer folks fly, they let the people who detail their planes have the platters and other serving items. I always wondered how we got so many weird serving trays. Another time when I visited him at work, I got to hold an albino kangaroo. Most adorable and softest animal I've ever touched. Story 12. I went to a New England prep school for high school on a full-ride sports scholarship. There were a decent amount of foreign national students, mainly from Asia, that came from extremely wealthy families. One of those students' parents bought him a brand new BMW Fictive Series, fully loaded when he got his license our junior year. When we graduated a year later, he was going back to Korea and obviously couldn't take the car. So he gave it to his best friend kid, got an 80K car at 17 years old, just for being good friends with the right guy. I'll never forget that. Story 13. This was ages ago. I worked in a DVD store. A woman came in with 5 A4 pages, double-sided, of movie titles and just asked me to fetch what we had. I ran about and collected DVDs and Blu-rays close to 1K worth. I asked what they were for. She was a PA for a billionaire and getting them for his yacht. Story 14. I tutored a wealthy 5-year-old. I got paid good money to spend an hour drawing and coloring and playing with this kindergartner, but all in French. He had been to more places in the world by 5 than I'll ever go to in my whole lifetime, probably. The best part of the job were the perks, though. They would take me and my SO out to dinner at fancy restaurants and pay the bill no matter what it was. They would invite us over to eat some delicacy they prepared. Wife was Chinese Vietnamese, husband was Indian, and they'd always have some house guests staying with some crazy resume. For example, one time they had a diplomat for the Netherlands there to do business. They had houses in my city and in San Francisco and would fly there all the time. They invited me on several occasions, but I never had time to go. I also befriended and stayed with the daughter of Russian oligarchs who lived in Paris. The mom was a famous writer, and the dad did something in business. Their grandfather was a famous Soviet writer, and so in general, they lived a very cultured life. They lived in the richest part of Paris called Neuilly-sur-Seine and had houses in the Alps, Crimea, and Moscow. The crazy part, or rather sad part, was that she only had a few options for a career. She could be a doctor, a lawyer, or a businesswoman. Their son was lucky enough to study at the Geneva Conservatory, but that was only because he was really talented. In this family, if you didn't have a natural artistic talent, you only had those 3 career prospects to choose from. I had the impression that she was rather depressed about how limited her options were and how much pressure was put on her to succeed. Story 15. I used to work for a company that modified aircraft for really rich people. I'm talking 747s, not Gulfstreams. This company had made several aircraft for this one customer, who I was told had purchased a new one solely because his spiritual advisor had told him that one of his current planes was bad luck. He still let his wife use it for her personal travel. To me, one of the most exquisite features of these planes wasn't the gold-plated everything or rare wood veneers, it was the silk carpet. That stuff cost over $1,000 per square foot and feels like walking on a bed of angel feathers harvested in the most inhumane way possible. Granted, these guys don't deck out the whole plane, just their personal areas. The aft third is usually reserved for staff and such, and is more like a fancy economy class. But yeah, silk carpet. Story 16. I became personal friends with my boss and his wife. Super nice people. The wife turned out to be an heiress and would buy me whatever I mentioned, like in passing during a conversation. I learned gifts were how she was raised to show love. I've trained myself to only talk about things I already own, unless I find something useful she might like and suggest it for her. Story 17. Have been working for the super rich for some time. Craziest thing I've seen. Brand new 90-meter, multi-million-pound GBP yacht was built in Netherlands. Maiden voyage to Antibes in France. Owner came on board and left after a few hours. Next week, we get sent to Genoa, Italy, where all the bathrooms on board were ripped out and upgraded. That doesn't sound like a big deal, but I'm talking about brand new marble sinks, showers, floors, and lobbies all crowbarred out, chucked in skips. Tons of brand new polished marble binned. New marble colors and patterns arrived in the weeks following. There's feed me money, there's fudge you money, and there's it's not even a thought money. Story 18. I used to work for an Arab billionaire's son, a daddy's money guy. Terrible garbage human being. Once saw him spend $16,000 on a wallet, was a fancy one, with little gold spikes on it and stuff. He had shoes with gold on them. I remember one year for his birthday, he received like 30 cakes, big fancy cakes, and he told us to leave them on the floor in the hallway outside his room. We walked by those cakes every day for 2 weeks, waiting for instruction. After the 2 weeks, we were told to throw them away. Story 19. When rich people want to buy a Jaguar in the UK, they get assigned a special salesperson who is incredibly knowledgeable. They meet in a special fancy office, and special arrangements can be made. This was my friend Chris' job. He had access to things that a normal Jaguar salesperson wouldn't have. Like he could ring up the manager of the factory for special requests level of access. Well, a Saudi price wanted to buy this new Jaguar that had been released, so they met up and spent a full day specing the Jaguar out. I believe the final price was something like $125K for the vehicle. Then came the decision for color. At the time, the factory had 16 different color choices for this model. The prince asked if he could sleep on it, as it was getting late, and almost time for dinner prayer, my friend Chris says, of course, and they set a time to meet the new morning. The next morning, the Saudi price is like, I figured out an acceptable solution to my color dilemma, to which Chris goes, and what would that be? The Saudi prince goes, I'll order one of each color. And my friend Chris is like, oh, well, of course. They quote delivery time. Saudi prince was fine and asked for his options and was presented with ocean travel options, to which the prince said, what about air cargo? Chris, thinking maybe they'd do 1 or 2 by air cargo and the rest by boat. The prince was like, no, I want all 16 vehicles loaded on a plane and flown to Saudi Arabia. So that's the story on how 16 of the same Jaguar with different colors ended up being flown to Saudi Arabia. All in the total cost was around $2.5 million. Please note, the prices should be not. Story 20. I'm a driving instructor, and one group rented the track to drive their supercars for the day. At the end of the day, they all partnered up and got into the cars to leave. After they were gone, we realized that they had forgotten their Lamborghini Aventador at the track. Story 21 was a boyfriend of a girl from an obscenely rich family. The sister used to have the nanny, who was sleeping with the husband, but that's another story, fly to Paris in their G550 to buy the newest Hermes bag so she could show it off a few days before it went on sale in the US. Story 22. Some extremely wealthy people I have been around have a more acute sense of their own time and mortality, leading to impatience. Like they understand how awesome their lives are, and therefore how short they feel. I knew a guy whose vintage yacht broke down before summer, so he bought another one strictly for that upcoming summer. His reasoning was he likely had 20 full health summers left in his life and didn't want to spend one of them without a boat considering he had the means to. Honestly, can't argue with that logic. Story 23. I used to pet sit. I remember a rich person asking me to pet sit their cat. There was a lot of TVs in almost every room. The weirdest was the bathroom. Sorry, cat bathroom. There was a TV playing cat cartoons, an overly fancy litter box, and paintings of cats. Story 24. Family friends were having marital issues. Their marriage counselor figured out a lot of their problems were overcooking meals. The counselor reminded them that they are rich and can just cater all their meals, and it would be cheaper than getting a divorce. They listened to the counselor and now are happily married again. Answer reminds me of a joke. A man is upset about his irrational fear that there is a monster under his bed. He decides this needed to change, so he starts going to a therapist. After months of therapy, his fear is still there, so he leaves the therapist to find someone who can cure him. A month later, the therapist runs into him and sees that he appears happier than before. She asks, "Did you finally get over your fear of a monster under your bed?" He replies, "Yes, and it only took one therapy session too." How? Simple. He just told me to cut off the legs of my bed. Edit. Guys, I know it's an actual therapy technique. It's called Cognitive Behavioral Therapy, CBT. Story 25. I worked for UPS for a hot minute as a driver helper and got to see some interesting things. The one driver had the rich of the rich route, the mansions worth tens of millions around the Ann Arbor, MI area. The Ford mansion, Lloyd Carr, the one recent guy for Michigan football that I'm forgetting that also worked for Little Caesars. Edit. The name I was forgetting was Dave Brandon. Anyway, I got to see Dave Brandon's mansion. It was gated, deep in the woods, and absolutely huge. The driver, a 33-year UPS veteran, told me these guys with these huge mansions like this, they don't live there by themselves. Sometimes don't live there at all. They move their entire extended families in there. Parents, sisters, brothers, aunts, uncles, cousins, etc. And they all live off the rich guy's dime, ordering whatever they want whenever they feel like it. I think we delivered 30 or 40 packages there that one day. Second story, from the same day and with the same driver, we delivered to a smaller but still huge house with an extremely long and wooded driveway. The driver was cursing about how much he disliked these people because they always park this huge jerk boat in the only possible turnaround point in the driveway. So he goes in backwards and floors it. Maybe 40 must show us posh backwards. About 250 yards of bends, straights, and he drove it absolutely perfectly, never driving off or missing the driveway. We get to the house and he needed a signature. He handed me the package and said he'll get the signature and just hand them the package and we'll go. Well, we get to the door and this maybe late 40s or early 50s man, kind of a Rick Moranis, George Costanza type of build. Short, extremely thick glasses, balding but very skinny build. He's standing in the front door with a lab-looking dog on a leash. The driver says, "Good evening, we just need a signature and we'll be on our way." The guy says, "No, I can't. I have to take my dog out first." This fudge guy was fully prepared to make us stand there and wait for his dog to do whatever business before just signing his name and letting us drop the package by his door. The driver said, "No, we just need your signature and we'll be on our way and you can walk your dog." The guy said fine and took the 2 seconds it takes to sign your name, and we dropped off his package and left. That left an impression on me. That guy valued our time so little it was worth less than his dog shoot. Like he was in his own world, and we weren't delivering 300 stops just before Christmas. Answer. I was a mailman, and when first starting out was the fill-in whenever a carrier called out sick or went on vacation. I live in the middle of the country and had no idea that some of the wealthiest people in the country live here. And of course, those people still get mail, but it's almost always to a P.O. box or to a business box. But packages still have to go to the front door. You'd be surprised how many Amazon packages I took to the front door of a family estate that publicly is the main competitor of Jeff Bezos. I tried leaving packages with the security guys at the front gate, but they just waved me and my mail truck through and said to leave it at the side door around the back of the house. I guess even American royalty still like to act like regular people and get that dopamine spike when they find their online purchases when they're about to leave the house. I delivered an insured package to that house one time that required a signature from the recipient, and it had to be by the person on the mail. The assistant or butler or whoever was pissed about it. But one of the richest people in the country signed happily after I waited a few minutes, and he was happy as shoot about whatever was in the box and wasn't fazed at all about showing me his driver license and having to sign my scanner. It was truly bizarre that even this man, with his immeasurable wealth, had to jump through the hoops of the USPs, and he seemed to have no problem with it whatsoever. Story 26. My wife's aunt and uncle were busy the entire day of their 25th anniversary and returned home at about 21 hours. Decided that the kids needed a bit of fun and booked a private jet to Moscow. They live in Paris and spent a week there. Money, gotta love it. Answer. My aunt and uncle aren't filthy rich, but my aunt makes a fair amount in the 6 digits. Enough that my uncle can do his private contracting as a hobby for fun just because he likes it. But they'll just decide, let's go to Hawaii for a week and do that 3 to 4 times every year on a whim. Since my cousins moved out, it's just them, but they own like 5 cars. Nothing ultra expensive, like 30-40K new, but they cycle out the oldest one every year for whatever that year's model is, and they buy top-of-the-line phones. But at least I get to experience some of the trickle down. Their 2 daughters get first picks on hand-me-downs when they upgrade, and every so often I get what's left. Haven't had to buy a new car or phone in like 10 years. I finally just upgraded from my old S5 to a BlackBerry Keone a few months ago, lol. Story 27. I've worked with some fairly wealthy people in the developing world. More or less new money, people who have been successful with some business venture or other. Overall, they're a bit out of touch with the realities of the world. I used to think that they were a bit naive too, because I saw a lot of other people taking advantage of them, outright robbing them. Over time, I realized while that's not untrue, it's more complicated. They did fail to notice a lot of uncollegiate activity on the part of the people they hired, but not all of it. What they did notice, they wrote off as the cost of finding people they could trust with projects that were actually important to them and work with for years. So yeah, you could overbill them for a few $1,000 once or twice, but if you worked hard and produced results instead, you could bootstrap your whole business to the next level with just them as a client. Eventually, I realized they valued trust a lot more than they valued money. They made their money with fairly long-term, high-risk, high-reward ventures running in parallel, e.g. research. So it all makes a little more sense now. I know plenty of rich, useless people too, but not very well. A lot of wealth is simply inherited in Asia. Cash flow is a really difficult thing here. Some people think they're important because they're born rich and act like fools. They do some pretty wild stuff, but I don't stick around to hear about it. Answer. Out of touch really resonates with me. I had a friend who grew up fairly wealthy and married wealthy men. Not crazy rich, but millionaires and extremely comfortable. She used to talk about wanting to write a cookbook for poor people, but her recipes always involve stuff like grass-fed, organic ground beef. She got divorced at one point, and her income took a hit. She wondered if she'd qualify for public assistance. Like, lady, you live in a 3,500 million apartment, drive a luxury car, travel overseas 3x a year, have a maid. I don't think you'll qualify, lol. Story 28. My great-uncle was very well off. He did not have a guest house. It was a guest mansion, separate from his mansion, in case his kids dropped by. This does not include the Olympic-sized indoor pool. That was a separate building. He bought a cannon. He used it to shoot the mountain behind his house. He shot brand new special bowling balls out of it. They cost $100 per ball. Edit, I'm not sure of the actual size of the pool, but it was definitely bigger than most community pools. But if you want to see the cannon in action, Nitro Circus came by and shot a car with it in one of their episodes. I didn't expect this comment to explode, so I didn't mention the human slingshot. There have been a few viral videos made about it. Story 29. I worked at a resort marina that dealt with high-end boats. From mega yachts to brand new cigarette boats. Always assume the quiet dude with the stained shirt is the owner of the performance boat. Never expect tips from mega yachts. The most narcissistic guests were always surgeons. The angriest guests were lawyers. No offense to attorneys, I am one. The richest were in construction, commercial real estate. The best tippers were guys entertaining their side pieces on their boats when you know they're actual wives. Story 30. Nothing too fancy, but I used to help build multi-million-dollar homes about a decade ago. One couple, neurosurgeon and dentist, had an office with one of those bookcase doors leading under the stairs. They stored their surround sound equipment and a safe in there. Another house had a very micromanager-esque woman as the owner, along with her husband. She would regularly come to the site and order the workers around while the foreman sighed and rolled his eyes at her. At one point, he had to order her off the site because she was being a safety hazard to his workers. I remember this couple also has a creepy setup for their kids. 2 bunk beds on either side of a wall for the kids, and both rooms led to a bathroom facing the road with a big bay window right next to the tub. So essentially, any person driving or walking past or any neighbor could just look over and see these kids taking a bath. Story 31. I used to install DirecTV in wealthy areas of an East Coast city in the U.S. While I try to give customers options on where I install the satellite dish, I have to get a good line of sight for it to work properly. So sometimes the location options were limited. One rich lady's house, gorgeous house, right on the beach. I only found 2 good spots for the dish. It could either be on a pole in the middle of her backyard or on the corner of the roof. She definitely did not want it in the middle of her yard. Only problem was that she had a metal roof, and we used specific mounting hardware for that. We happened to be back ordered on that hardware for a few weeks out. When I informed her of this, she got visibly upset that she'd have to wait that long to get her cable up and going. I apologized many times and told her she'd need to reschedule a few weeks later, and I leave. 3 days later, looking over my work orders for the day, and I notice her name and address. Like, wow, I bet she thinks she's getting a different installer who she can try to convince to give her a different answer. I was wrong. I pull up to the house brand new shingle roof. I did the install on the roof. Story 32. I live near a company that builds yachts. One day, there was an odd-looking yacht. A crew member explained to me that was a shadow yacht. You see, when you get hyper-rich and have multiple yachts, you wouldn't want to ruin the aesthetic of your nice yachts with jet skis and helicopters, nor would you want your crew to sleep on the nice yacht. So you buy a shadow yacht to store your toys and to house your crew. This shadow yacht follows your fleet of nice yachts around. Story 33. My partner once helped build a 350,000 pergola, built from, I want to say, something like mahogany imported from Fiji because they couldn't source solid beams from anywhere else and were in the middle of the Midwest. It was then painted because the color didn't suit the homeowner. I still sometimes think about the fact that our beautiful historic home that we're lucky enough to own was still over $100K cheaper than this person's glorified outside stick fort. Story 34. Client was a mega millionaire in the 60s, so even richer when I met him. He'd ride the bus to the office to have free coffee every day. Edit. He was the founder of a company that had its name emblazoned on shipping containers being transported via big rig trucks in the States, but also international shipping and logistics. Came into financial offices daily for the free coffee. Didn't even talk about his finances just for the coffee and then would skedaddle. Story 35. Some kids have whole plans and strategies they practice to prevent being kidnapped or harmed by crazy stalkers. One kid I worked with was the kid of a big Hollywood player, and people would stalk the kid in an attempt to get to the parent. So this nutjob wielding a screenplay broke in and cornered the kid. Here I am thinking I'm going to have to throw myself physically between them, but the kid dove into a nearby dog kennel and locked themselves in. He couldn't get out, but the nutjob couldn't get in either. So the nutjob just threw the screenplay at him into the kennel. Meanwhile, I had called the cops. I was so impressed by the kid's quick thinking and asked how he got the idea. But he said that he always keeps an eye out for a way to escape. And when he sees someone he doesn't know approach, he gets ready to run. I felt awful that this kid had to live like that. If I hadn't seen it happen myself, I would have thought it was just paranoia. Story 36. I work at a university offshoot where a billionaire has donated a few buildings. He'll drive through every now and then to take a look at them. He'll stop and chat with us lowly workers and occasionally give us tickets to the games in the arena he donated to the university. Edit. Well, this blew up more than I expected. No one's guessed his name so far, but he keeps a low profile, and so you wouldn't recognize his name unless you were in the know. Also, it seems I need to get back into deleting Garfield. Story 37. Rich broker I worked with got a divorce. His wife wanted $30K a month per child in child support. His lawyer convinced him it was a good deal and he should take it. He asked me if $30K a month was a lot of money. I told him that was more than I make in an entire year. He said, fudge, Can't believe I have such a shoot lawyer. Cool dude, had to overnight him some pants because somehow he ended up in Scotland and it was cold and he couldn't be bothered to go shopping. He had a house in Santa Barbara that was given to his first ex-wife that stopped paying taxes on it, basically an abandoned mansion. He sent his assistant there to check it out, and there was a family of raccoons living in it. He really liked Grey's Anatomy and needed ice for his Diet Coke. Like really needed ice. So the office got a 1,000 ice machine just on the off chance he showed up to the office. Story 38. Hired someone to take his credit card and create for him and pay for a whole fake and very expensive trip to Europe so he could go to Mexico with his mistress during that same time. Was in the middle of a divorce and he didn't want any evidence of his affair affecting the proceedings, so he had someone create a whole alibi. Story 39. Old high school teacher of mine is an extremely successful private tutor and does a lot of work in the wealthy neighborhoods in the area. He told us once he was tutoring a kid and helped him get prepared and pass his college-level physics class. And at the end of their last session, the kid told him to wait there and went into his dad's office and came out with his payment and an extra $1,000. My teacher tried to deny it, saying it was too much, but the kid said his dad asked him to give a tip. Story 40. As a chef, I've seen, heard, and accommodated all sorts of bizarre requests. Michael J. Fox Kid loves overcooked spaghetti and ketchup. Run DMC dips shrimp tempura in ketchup. Drake won't eat anything but well-done streak. Bill Gates is actually surprisingly casual, and Larry Ellison will go out of his way to thank the staff, even go as far as to cheers with Louis XIII. Migos brought Dino nuggets for us to cook. Adam Devine has paid tabs for the entire restaurant. Snoop gave the kitchen blunts. Kanye eats breakfast alone. I've snuck Dirt Nasty into a private party. The list goes on. Story 41. I had a client that lived right outside NYC. They were new money in an area that was mostly old money. Disliked their neighbors, but played nice face-to-face. Every time the neighbor's wife would buy something and try to show it off, they would buy a more expensive rare version or buy two of the same if that wasn't possible. The vast majority of it was displayed in the front room. Client's wife called it the fudge-off room. They were a bit eclectic, but were really nice people. Story 42. I dated a woman who did interior design for a middle-tier Silicon Valley developer. Middle meaning spec homes in the 2M range, which was a nice house 19 years ago. Of course, now 2M gets you a hovel with a nice paint job. Anyway, the ultimate stove to have was a La Cornue. Those are the ones at Williams-Sonoma stores with lots of brass and enamel. They were $20K and had a multi-year wait, so she figured out that she could go to France and get them in like 6 weeks for $10K shipping. So that was most of her design gig vacationing in France and buying stoves. Story 43. As a chauffeur and ski companion for a mega-rich guy's daughter, he sent me out to buy her a birthday present for when she turned 17, I think it was. This was way back in the 70s. So I got her a new BMW 2002 and told the dealer to charge it to the guy, which was cool when later the dealer offered me an absolute deal on a trade. And that was the usual cream puff, only driven to church on Sundays. $500 for a really good late model used car, but an American car they never dealt in. Much later on, 30 years later, I was working with an architect building a home for another mega-rich guy, and the library was to be paneled in knotty pine. Guy's wife arrived when it was almost completely trimmed out and says, "Too many knots." So we ripped out the whole interior, and the guy, who owned several sawmills, sent back to the mill to ship another truckload so we could select the boards under the wife's direction. And same wife, same building, could not figure out how to turn the car around in the triple-wide driveway. So he had a turntable installed in the garage, so all she had to do was miss the edges of the door on the way in or out. Story 44. Oh, my grandpa was a piano tuner. He couldn't drive due to epilepsy, so family would take him to jobs. One day, Dad took him to a job and got talking to the owner. He said the guy lived in the biggest, nicest mansion he had ever seen. Everything in the house was crazy expensive, but the owner and his wife were very down-to-earth and normal, if not a bit rough around the edges. Finally, his curiosity got the better of him, and Dad asked how they made their money. The guy said he used to drive a truck and got tired of needing to carry around bottles of ketchup. That's how my dad met the creator of the ketchup packet. Answer: correction. That's how your dad met a substances kingpin who used the ketchup packet story as a cover. Actually, your story sent me down a little rabbit hole looking at the invention of sauce packets. It seems there is a little bit of contention over who actually invented them first. I reckon this makes my above theory even stronger, as there isn't a clear-cut answer to who actually invented individual ketchup packets, LOL. It seems an Aussie reinvented them into the squeezy ones I'm familiar with. Story 45. I have worked for some of the richest people in Maryland, and the one thing that stands out more than others is this doctor I worked for in Montgomery County. It's one of the most affluent zip codes in America. Anyway, this guy owned a shootload of offices around the DC area, tons of employees and associate doctors, etc. Guy was seriously loaded. Huge garage full of super expensive cars like multiple Ferraris, art collection, wine cellar, the works. I used to do IT work for his medical practice and manage all the servers and stuff, and occasionally went to their house because I was the lead admin. I once was working in his house and was walking around upstairs where the bedrooms were. I shoot you not, this guy was laying in bed being fed by an assistant. Like he was literally laying in bed while someone hand-fed him, and not like grapes, but a regular meal. It was fudge weird as shoot. Imagine someone feeding you a full meal like a steak and spoons of soup, salad, etc., and you never used your hands. It was like an adult being fed like a baby. It seemed like Saddam Hussein type shoot. I've never seen anything like that before, and that was what popped into my mind, like a dictator or something who demands to be treated like a literal king. There was nothing intimacy about it. Keep in mind this was a man in his 50s who was in fine physical shape and didn't need a caregiver. It was just pure opulence. Then one time I was working in the kitchen area, and his young son, probably late teen, surly 20s, came walking past me and stunk to high heaven of pot, which I'm totally cool with and we joked about. He went to the kitchen and poured an IPA into a glass and went back to his room. This was at 9 a.m. LOL. I thought it was hysterical. He was a cool kid from my interactions with him. Probably just figured, my dad is rich as shoot, so I don't have to worry about anything. So he was totally laid back. I've got some other strange things, but that is by far the strangest. Edited for additional content. Story 46. Entire basement full of crap that the wife bought. Furniture, clothes, boxes, and boxes of shoot. Mostly from Neiman Marcus, Nordstrom, and similar specialty stores. Online wasn't as big back then. Husband told me she had million-miler status on American Airlines just from the stuff she put on her credit card. They had separate accounts. Back then, credit card purchases counted as if you had flown the miles. Story 47. I started working for this couple's company and managed to be accepted by their 2 Irish wolfhound dogs, which the owner said had never happened before with anyone but him and his partner. As a result, they hired me to come over after work to brush, walk, medicate, and feed the dogs, as well as come over and take one of their high-end spare cars to pick up bulk orders of diced mutton. We're talking $100 plus at a time, from a butcher they liked on the other side of town. They gave me the keys to their heritage-listed home in a posh area while they were away, so I could take care of the dogs and sleep over if I wanted. They were both absolutely lovely people, rich but time poor, and always treated me with great respect and friendliness. They bought a brand new Toyota Troop Carrier for the dogs to travel in, as 2 wolfhounds would not fit in his Porsche or her Mercedes. I'd load the dogs into the Troopy, and we'd go to a fairly local beach so the dogs could run and play to their heart's content once a month, splashing around in the sea. Then I'd bring them home, happy and tired, wash them, feed them, tuck them in for the night, and return to my own home. The dogs slept on a huge, fantastically expensive leather sofa on the back deck that had been replaced with a newer, smaller version inside the house. They were always renovating and would ask me to dispose of the old furnishings. I asked if I could use some of them for myself and was always told, "Oh yes, take what you want and dump the rest." They only wanted the stuff gone, and I had their blessings to sell off and keep the proceeds. For someone earning less than AU 50K a year, this was a godsend, and my tatty old house benefited from their cast-off rugs and furnishings so much. I was grateful, and they were happy, and they had 100 faith and trust in me, which was mind-blowing, especially when I was asked to take over processing the staff wages for the company. Unreal. Thanks, Jeff and Helen. Story 48. A cousin works at, let's just say, a higher-end, worldwide known hotel chain, and he works at one in a large U.S. city. Couple of years back, a random guy came up to him and asked him for a dinner suggestion and says, "Price isn't a concern." My cousin keeps up with what's trendy in the city, knows some owners and such, gave the guy a suggestion. Next day, the guy asked for him by name, gave him 100 and said dinner was amazing. "Now where should we eat tonight?" Another suggestion, and the next day, another 100. Only this time, his manager saw this goes down, and then a few minutes later, "Do you know who that is?" "Nope, I won't say the name." but let's just say old money and probably in the 100s of millions net worth. Cool story, huh? Well, a couple months later, my cousin went to work one day and was told this person would be calling at 6 p.m. and only wanted to speak to my cousin. The conversation was short. Basically, we're in town next month for 4 nights, booked the 6 of us 4 wonderful dinners. We trust your opinion. He was given an email for basically their family assistant and to let that person know the plans. The family arrived, said hi to him as they checked in, and said they were looking forward to their dinners. And 4 days later, upon checking out, handed him $1,000 for his wonderful local knowledge, or something like that. Story 49. I used to work in business aviation. Someone wrote poor people suck on a small spot on the tail of a private jet. Probably the most tasteless. I also had a lady come in on a charter and having a panic about how she couldn't remember where she left her Range Rover. It was hours after closing, and she literally had no info about where it should be. I had to deduce that she had probably departed from the other side of the airport and found her car for her. They never tipped and were regular late-night call-ins. Story 50. Russian guy I sometimes work for bought a nice house in a pretty nice area of the French Riviera, Mugan. He didn't even visit it before buying and just judged he liked it on pictures. He paid 11 million euros for it, but when he arrived, he thought the view wasn't perfect because of another house that was on the way. To me, honestly, it was barely there and didn't even mask the sea. So he sent his lawyer there to make an offer to the owners, 4 million euros. But they declined, so he doubled the offer, and they declined again, so he doubled again. And this time they accepted to sell. He had that house destroyed the very day he got the keys and had an underground parking lot built instead for the cars he won't be using much here. So basically the guy paid that distant house more than the one he's planning to spend his summers in just to have it disappear because it kind of annoyed him. And when he told me the story, he was laughing the whole time. Story 51. My cousin was a caretaker for one of those Beverly Hills rich ladies. While she was alive, my cousin didn't know how to cook. So she flew a chef from Paris first class and have him set up in a hotel. All the chef did was come to her place every day and teach my cousin to cook. While they were watching TV, my cousin remarked that the newest Benz on the Camaro was nice. When he came to work the next day, she bought it for him, top of the line, with all the bells and whistles. Ever since that day, my cousin had to be careful on what he says. They returned the car. They have a tennis court at her place. He watched Nadal play there, I believe. Kardashian's dogs sometimes go to their yard. My cousin have a daughter. Daughter has a trust and can go any school from elementary to university fully paid. Sadly, the old lady died a couple of years ago. Left them about 20 mil USD. I think they are still fighting the grandkids at court because of it. That 20 mil was in the will and everything with a no contest clause, I think. Story 52. Was catering a wedding inside a family's second kitchen in the home. Though this was the lesser kitchen, the entire wall opened up to an infinity pool overlooking the ocean from up on a cliff. As we were prepping, a little girl, the family's youngest daughter it turns out, comes skipping into the room as cute as can be, maybe 6 or 7 years old. She helps herself to some of the pastries we'd prepared for later, without asking, and then walks up to me and says with wide eyes, "You do cooking for a job?" Thinking she's impressed, I respond proudly, "Yes, I do, actually. It's a lot of fun." Without hesitating, she says fairly plainly, "That sucks," before skipping away. Story 53. We used to have to close off the corridors under the hotel to let them enter and exit without being seen. Mainly celebrities, famous people, but also just very wealthy people who didn't want to be seen. Nothing really crazy happened in there, but it always makes me think of who the hell is running around under the hotel I'm staying in, LOL. The most memorable night was when a detective came accompanied by 2 older adults. I knew who they were right away. I grew up here in Florida. They stayed for, I think, 3 nights, and it was paid for by the feds. We took care of Casey Anthony's parents. Story 54. I don't cater to, but a couple of years ago, I had an experience with my wealthy friend that I'll never forget. He had one of those super fancy black cards, right? And we were traveling, by we, I mean, he was paying for most of the stuff and invited me and another friend of ours to tag along. And his son, who had special needs and sometimes acted up, I don't know what exactly he has, and it's a touchy subject for my friend, didn't want to stay at the Waldorf Astoria we just arrived. Like he was having one of his episodes and refused to stay at that hotel for reasons unknown. So my friend calls his credit card manager or something, and 3 minutes later he goes, "Luckily we didn't unpack. We're staying at the Beverly Wilshire." Well, my credit card gives me a movie ticket every month. If I spend over $500, that's nice too. Story 55. An acquaintance of mine was building a house for a married couple who dislike each other, But the husband was far too wealthy to get divorced. They had separate elevators installed, so they would never worry about ever having to see each other. Story 56. Until recently, I was working on the bread and pastry team at a very high-end restaurant in LA. Aside from the bread that was served before the meal, we would also have to make burger buns. We didn't have burgers on the menu, but we had to have some buns stocked in the freezer just in case some VIP decides they want a burger instead. Now there was also one particular regular who would order burgers, but only liked to eat them as sliders. So of course, we also had to make slider buns just in case he came in. God forbid we were to tell a rich person, "I'm sorry, we don't have hamburgers here." Story 57. Not my story, but I met someone who worked as a travel chef for some branch of an Arab royal family not to be named. But if you need a hint, they were the only people in America allowed to fly on 911 when all other air traffic in the country was shut down. Anyway, she had some wacky stories, but what stuck with me is the infant that all the servants referred to as the football, because that's how she was treated. Nobody interacted with the baby on a human level at all, servants or family. It was just a piece of luggage that had to be regularly tended to so it didn't die. I mean, who's got time for a baby, Amirat? Story 58. I worked for the sister of a billionaire doing odd jobs that eventually turned into doing the same for her friends and family. People in the single-digit millions spend recklessly, always trying to show off their wealth. People in the double-digit millions are a mixed bag. People in the 100 B range were incredibly interesting because the ones I worked for were incredibly frugal. If you took away the business aspect, they were normal people, not pretentious assholes. They didn't really care about appearances anymore. They drank 50 bottles of liqueur, not 1,000 scotches. They preferred pizza to a catered meal. They bought the home with the best view, not the biggest home. Their big purchases were also investments, own a PGA course, but use a 2,000 set of clubs because they like the fit. Make a $51 deal in khaki shorts, sandals, and a t-shirt. Never did I hear a raised voice. Every request was prefaced with please and often thanked genuinely. I was incredibly shocked, not the demeanor I anticipated. That leads me to the most common thing I saw. Terrible kids. Just absolute abominations of people. Terrible, demanding, and not worthy of the empires their parents built. Answer: this was my experience as well. I worked for a member of a Forbes 40 richest families. The wealth went back generations. He was a truly great human being. He'd spent his career running a Fortune 500 company, then spent his retirement in public service. He worked harder than anyone I've ever known and didn't care at all, ever, about impressing anyone. He served his guests cheddar cheese goldfish as a cocktail snack and had an elderly housekeeper who cooked the most basic things imaginable: hot dog casserole, creamed chicken over rice, liver and onions, etc., for whomever came to dinner. I once sat between a secretary of the Treasury and the president of a foreign country as they happily wolfed down the basic country food provided by the housekeeper. You could see how grateful they were not to get another overly complicated fancy dinner. My boss wore old hats, carried a briefcase he'd had for 30 years, and every winter helped people push their car out of the snow. He drank Old Taylor bourbon, smoked Cuban cigars when they weren't legal, and drove around in a Mercury Tracer wagon for years after I crashed his BMW. Whoops. He just lived his life and made his choices without worrying about what people would think. He was wonderful to his staff and literally became my godfather, since his example and encouragement led me to a career as a minister, despite my family's strong objections. When he was in his 90s and a year before he died, I visited him and introduced him to my spouse. He took her hand and said, "I've loved M. DeCount for a very long time. I hope you'll let me love you too." Now and again, someone who is very, very rich still understands what's of true value. Edit to add bonus story. Thanks for all the various awards, which obviously go to my old boss. I wanted to add that he also never let dignity get in the way of having fun. We were once leaving a congressional office building, which required taking an elevator down to the basement, then making our way past huge stacks of materials fresh from the printer's office. So several stories up, we wait for the elevator, and two of them arrive at the same time. I try to brace, knowing what's coming. I get shoved back as he leaps into an elevator yelling, "Race you!" and hammers on the closed door button. Hez, 65 years old. I jump into the other elevator just as its doors are closing and miraculously get a small head start. My advantage disappears, however, when my elevator stops on a lower floor to take on another passenger, a very high-ranking and famous member of Congress. Silently, we ride together to the basement, and when the doors open, my boss is nowhere to be seen, even though he definitely beat me. I follow the famous congressman toward the exit, and as we reach the first towering pile of boxes, my old boss comes leaping out from behind it with a war cry of victory, landing right in front of the now very freaked out congressman he'd been following. It was glorious to watch my old boss try to explain just what the hell he was doing, especially since he kept breaking up in laughter the whole time. That sort of thing happened a lot. Story 59. My niece married to an absurdly rich guy. His quirk, he did absolutely everything possible to hide his fortune. Simple clothes, normal car, decent but not lavish house, self-allowance. Guy literally disliked his fellow multi-millionaires in the guts. He told a story when he was really into Formula One, his dad bought him a karting track. Long story short, the guy got really good and won several small championships, earning a spot in a training camp with some of the current Formula One pros. As soon as they realized he came from money, there would be trainers, other kids, and pretty much everyone started treating him differently, basically saying he is not good enough and that he will be paid for to become a F1 pilot. That story repeated itself many times over from Oxford University, where they guy went to learn earning a scholarship not by simply paying, to pretty much every business deal where people were trying to get way more simply, cause his filthy rich and can afford it. Gold diggers who were ready to satisfy every adult dream of his, only to get into the money, etc., etc. Instead of becoming a cynical jerk version of Scrooge, he and his family just hid that they have wealth. They wanted normal lives and honest human interactions. Answer: did absolutely everything possible to hide his fortune. A guy I knew was a licensed electrician in the Bay Area, SF, who used to work on houses recently purchased by recently sold my company people. Most weren't high profile. There are a lot of high-value tech companies that gets acquired by big names, but most people wouldn't know unless they are in the industry. Apparently, that's how they operate. Sure, there were some that wanted to flaunt their wealth, but for the most part, they drove decent cars, but nothing crazy. Dumb under 40K. They still had nice houses, apparently, but not a mansion. Story 60. I deliver for Uber Eats, so I find myself in rich neighborhoods often. This one gated house sets their driveway up like a magazine at night, with lights on a fountain and an Escalade on each side of the driveway, parked on an angle with lights on them as well. Yes, 2 Escalades mirroring each other. Maybe they don't do it every night, but I've seen it a few times. Story 61. I live across the street from the Trump Towers in Miami. Yes, the one the Ukrainians were arrested at. There are cameras all over the entrance. But there are times when people showing up don't want to be on camera. Mostly see it happen when a party bus of strippers shows up. When the bus is coming down the street, 5-10 servants come out of the building, large black squares attached to long poles. They each put the large black squares up to completely block a camera. And then the bus deposits all the strippers and the servants go back inside. Story 62. I once worked at one of the largest private clubs in the world, in one of the little boutiques. In addition to clothes, we also had a small selection of things you'd find at a convenience store. Snacks, magazines, and newspapers. For some reason, these mega-rich high society people loved buying the magazines and were kind of fixated on them. People, Us, Cosmopolitan, etc. But they all acted like it was below them, like it was trashy and frowned upon to look at them. The men would come in and grab their newspapers, buy a magazine, and hide it inside the newspaper so no one else at the club knew they bought it. The women would come in and buy multiple, asking if we had newest editions yet, and then hide them in their purses. One of them, who was a Golden Globe awarded actress, got a magazine with something about The Bachelor on the cover. I said to her, "OMG, I love that show. Do you watch it?" This was before I knew it was taboo. Also, don't come at me. I love me some reality shows. And she got super weird, like all embarrassed. She looked around, making sure no one heard me say it, and was all paranoid. She was pretty friendly with me up until that point, and afterward wouldn't really make small talk with me anymore. I wish I could have said to all those people, "Don't you realize you all buy these magazines? That's why we keep them in stock. Just admit you all buy them and stop acting like prudes." Like what? Just weird. Story 63. Fine dining server. Bill Gates adding a side of broccoli to his meal, Melinda telling him he didn't need it, and Bill slumping in resignation. This was several years before they were divorced, and it's the first thing that came to mind when they separated. Story 64. I worked a catering event for the inventor of Tupperware. When I boxed up their leftovers, they naturally said, "We have containers in the pantry," so when I went to grab some Tupperware from the extremely organized pantry, I couldn't find a lid for any of the bottoms. Literally, the inventor of Tupperware's Tupperware drawer, or drawers in his case, was just as messy and disorganized as the rest of us. The family was very nice. Story 65. My mother worked at a prominent casino where Tiger Woods had special instructions for certain hallway cameras to go offline at certain time. Spoiler, he was having his 3 local girls visit him. Edit. Another fun one is Mike Tyson. My mother said he was maybe 5 and 8. Also was super funny and sweet to her. She said his lisp is very pronounced and that it still took her by surprise. She also said his hands were the size of small boulders. I guess they wasn't that crazy. Edit 2. The dudes from Whose Line were very low-key in their visits. They were all about privacy, but were incredibly gracious to my mom when she spoke to them. She asked Colin if Ryan was here also, and he said, "Yeah, he went out to get my hair. Hopefully he's back soon." She said Greg was really excited to talk to her and spent almost 45 minutes going over her life. System kid who joined the Navy, got Cat 5 clearance, and raised 4 kids by herself. Answer. Another fun one is Mike Tyson. My mother said he was maybe 8. Also was super funny and sweet to her. She said his lisp is very pronounced and that it still took her by surprise. Can confirm this. He owned a gym built out of a warehouse that was like a training camp. So one of the warehouses was an actual housing unit for the MMA fighters he trained, while the other was the gym. I had a food truck back then, and our commissary was right next door. When we first moved in, we were having trouble bringing the truck into our garage because those parking IDK lump things that mark parking spots couldn't be driven over, and we needed a wide berth to circle in. Mike Tyson and one of his other guys came out with a toolkit to tear 2 of the lump thingies out of the ground so we could get our truck into our warehouse. We had just opened. We didn't know to think of that when we signed the lease. Also, I usually worked alone late at night doing prep work. Just a tiny girl in a shoot area of downtown Miami. So he got one of his security cameras aimed at our door, and he would regularly send the guys out if people came soliciting while I was there to make sure I was okay. Seriously, a complete and total sweetheart. All the guys at his gym were. I was scared seeing all these beefed up guys always hanging out in the lot, but they were all always so kind. One in particular was ERC, a Cuban Olympian for MMA. Yoel. I can't remember. This was years ago. He used to help me take my trash out every night. I had no idea who he even was back then until another warehouse neighbor told my sister, who I worked with. Story 66. The father of a close friend has been the CEO of multiple private banks over the past 15 or so years. These are some of the more absurd things I've seen. I used to go over to his place for sleepovers when we were both younger, think 14, 15, and I remember him just having this entire 1-on-3 memory shelf stacked full of MacBooks and other Apple products. Think 30 MacBooks and another 20 or so iPhones. Turns out he would get 23 laptops and at least 2 phones a year, and when the new year comes around, he'd shelve whatever he had, no matter how great the condition, some barely a month old, and do the same thing over again for the latest models. When word that the early batches of iPhone 6s could bend, his younger brother, probably 78 at the time, managed to bend his by doing a handstand. There was this other time I went for a swim during a party he was hosting. Without hesitation, this man throws his custom Goyard wallet on the very wet poolside floor and jumps in. I just stared at him in disbelief, and he went, "It's just a wallet, doesn't matter." Edit. Just remembered another story from a different family friend. So the family who this friend comes from owns the largest group of car dealerships in Southeast Asia. Pretty much every brand you can think of, other than Italian cars and Tesla, think Warren's size. She's been stranded in my country due to the pandemic. They're foreigners. And whenever she's feeling homesick, she'll call up the bakery in her home country to place orders and get said orders flown in on a private plane the next day.